Wow, the studio mandated sequel to a movie that never intended to have a sequel didn't turn out very good? Who could have seen that coming? Honestly, the more I thought about this film, the worse I felt about it. Joker Folie À Deux is one of the biggest stinkers of the year, partly because it taints the legacy of the first movie, and partly because this movie just stank that bad. If the first Joker movie was a mansion, this movie is like putting a smelly outhouse right on the front lawn. This film is riddled with problems, which I'll get into in a bit, but first, let me speak on some of the positives that I took away from this movie. Generally, the film looks really nice. The cinematography is well done, the lighting and all of that looks fine, it looks good. And despite the inconsistent meaningfulness of the dream sequences and like the musical numbers, I actually thought those looked maybe the best in this entire movie, and they help breathe some life into an otherwise bloated, boring, slow narrative. Speaking of breathing life, the performances are great. Joaquin turns in a marvelous performance, and so does Lady Gaga, but even that really can't save the redundant and weak story. I like the idea of the ambiguity as to whether or not the Joker is another personality, like a split personality from Arthur, or it's just him the whole time, even in the Joker makeup, but it's not really executed too well. I feel like it was too blatant, and there was not really any subtlety with that material in the film. As you could probably already tell, with me tacking on some sort of clarification or dissenting point after my praises for the film, there is a lot more done wrong in this movie than done right. First of all, the movie has no reason to exist. The story from the first Joker movie was completed. This one didn't need to happen. There was no need for a sequel, and the only reason this film got a sequel was because the studio mandated that they make a sequel since the first one made so much money. But ignoring that fact, this movie is a terrible sequel because it completely regresses most of the character development Arthur went through in the first movie. It's almost like the Rise of Skywalker in a way, trying to undo everything that The Last Jedi did because J.J. Abrams was salty at Rian Johnson for screwing up his Star Wars saga. This film almost seems like Todd didn't like the story he told in the first one, so now he's just trying to undo the whole thing. This movie should really be called Arthur Folie À Deux because Joker is hardly in this movie, and even when he does make appearances, it's either mainly in dream sequences, or he's almost nothing like he was in the original film. Harley, or Lee as she's mainly referred to, is alright, but I think they made her motives and actions a little too blatant, whereas there would have been more like intrigue and mystery if they would have been more subtle and treated her like motives with more ambiguity. That would have made it more engaging and harder to get a read on what exactly she wants, like whose side was she on, does she really want to help Arthur, or is she just obsessed with his Joker persona? And the way the storyline is presented in the film, it's like asking if Benedict Arnold was loyal to the independent colonies or really supporting the British. It's just way too heavy-handed, and it saps away any curiosity or potential mystery from that aspect of the story. And if we're talking about the story, we might as well talk about it like this. Because this thing was more choppy than the waters of a kiddie pool after a 700-pound sumo wrestler jumped into it. This movie was like trying to formulate a sentence in rock bottom, because every time they would string a couple scenes together, they would just thrust a musical into the middle of it, and it was almost like trying to form a sentence, but you have to go before you say every other word. This shouldn't be a spoiler to anyone other than Patrick Starr, but yes, this film is a quasi-musical. After Arthur meets Lee, the narrative is littered with various songs and musical numbers, some of which do enhance the story a little bit by relating the dream sequence to whatever just happened, but about half of these musical numbers seem like they have no relevance to the rest of the story, and they sort of just serve to be small flashes of livelihood in a mostly dull, drawn-out narrative. I'm also of the opinion that there were far too many of these musical scenes in the movie. It would have been better if all of them enhanced the story in some unique way, like maybe I wouldn't have been covering my ears and crying after the 15th musical started, but these musical scenes are just far too often not cleverly incorporated, lack narrative substance, and only serve to break up the main story in extremely distracting fashion. Another thing is that all the courtroom scenes, and even a few ones outside of the courtroom, are just so redundant and unengaging because they mostly just recap the events of the first film. There's hardly anything of interest happening in this movie other than the potential relationship with Lee, but as I already explained, that doesn't really work too well most of the time, and because of that, the story overall just drags with little to no intrigue, is over redundant, not subtle at all, choppy as all heck, and destructive towards the character arc established in the first film. And on top of that, it's overbloated with way too many musical numbers that provide almost nothing of substance to the narrative. In other words, it's, not good. So, how about a joke to end off this review? What do you get when you cross a director who seemingly hates his first movie with a sequel to a movie that has already finished telling its story and throw in some random musical numbers because you casted Lady Gaga? I'll tell you what you get. You get a disappointing mess of a movie. If you enjoyed the review, consider leaving a like and subscribing and checking out some of my other videos. I have some big projects coming out later this month, so definitely stay tuned for those. Anyways, I've been Ghost Host. I'll catch you all on the next one. Have a great day.